The night was cold and silent when the cage arrived. Heavy wheels rolled across the ground, creaking under the weight of iron bars. The guards pushed it forward with rough hands, their boots striking the dirt like hammers. Torches lit the shadows, throwing strange shapes on the walls. Inside the cage, something moved slowly like a wounded animal. The men laughed as they dragged it closer. "They call her a monster," one of the soldiers said, spitting to the side. His voice was filled with disgust. Another guard banged the bars with his weapon, and the thing inside flinched. "Not even worth keeping alive," he sneered. The human worker, a quiet man named Elias, stood apart from the crowd. He was not a soldier. He was only a repairman, hired to fix broken machines in this alien outpost. But when the cage stopped in front of him, his eyes locked with the prisoner inside, and everything around him faded into silence. She was not a monster. Her skin was pale and strange, with glowing lines running like rivers across her arms. Her eyes were wide and full of fear, shining faintly in the torchlight. She was young, no older than a girl, but her face carried the weight of suffering. Chains clinked around her wrists and ankles. She kept her head low as though the world had given her no reason to lift it. The soldiers spat insults, calling her beast, filth, curse. But Elias did not hear their words. He only saw how she trembled, how her lips pressed tightly together to hide her pain. For a moment he forgot the cage, the guards, and the danger. He saw only someone broken, someone alone. The officer in charge laughed loudly. "This is what the galaxy fears? A pitiful creature that barely speaks? She will rot here until she dies." His voice carried across the camp and the men cheered, but Elias felt his chest grow heavy. Something inside him whispered that the story was wrong. The cage door opened just a crack, enough for the officer to throw in scraps of old food. The girl reached out with thin, shaking fingers, but a soldier slammed the bars shut before she could touch it. The men roared with laughter again. Elias stepped forward without thinking. His voice was calm, almost a whisper, but it cut through the noise. "Stop." The laughter slowed. Some of the soldiers turned to look at him with sharp eyes. "What did you say, worker?" one asked, his tone dangerous. Elias swallowed, but he did not step back. He looked into the cage again. The girl was watching him now, her eyes full of surprise, almost as if no one had ever spoken for her before. He saw tears at the corner of her eyes, though she quickly hid them by lowering her head again. He leaned closer, his words so soft that only she could hear them. "You are not a monster," he whispered. "You are beautiful." For the first time, her eyes widened in shock. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak but did not know how. The glow on her skin flickered faintly, like the first spark of a hidden flame. Behind him, the soldiers began to laugh again, mocking his words. "Beautiful? Look at her. She's cursed. She's dangerous," they shouted. One of them pushed Elias roughly on the shoulder, but he did not move his gaze away from her. The girl's hands trembled on the bars. She seemed frozen, caught between fear and hope. No one had ever spoken such words to her. No one had ever looked at her with kindness. That night, Elias could not sleep. The image of her face haunted him, the way her eyes had widened at his words, the way her glow had flickered like a secret star. He lay awake, listening to the guards' laughter outside, and he felt a heavy truth inside his chest. The others saw a monster. He saw something else. When dawn came, the cage was still there, and so was she. Her head rested against the bars, her eyes closed as though she had not slept. Elias walked by slowly, carrying his tools, pretending to be busy. But when her eyes opened, they found his again. This time she did not look away. In that silent moment, a fragile bond was born, unseen by the soldiers, unheard by the officers. Promise without words. He would not let her die in chains. He would not let their cruelty be the last thing she knew. Far above them, the stars shone faintly in the morning sky, hidden by the rising light. Elias wondered if she had ever seen them. He wondered what she would think if she could look beyond these cages, beyond this prison, and see the endless sky. And deep in his heart, he swore that one day he would show her. But for now, the cage remained closed. The soldiers laughed. The officers mocked. And the girl, called a monster by all, held silently to the only words of kindness she had ever heard. "You are not a monster. You are beautiful." The camp grew louder each day, but Elias found himself growing quieter. He fixed machines, carried tools, and nodded when spoken to, but his mind was never on his work. It was always with her, the girl in the cage, The others called her a monster, a curse, a thing to fear. But every time Elias passed by, he saw the truth in her eyes. She was not a beast. She was a prisoner. Late at night, when most of the guards had drunk themselves to sleep, Elias would wander close to her cage. At first, he only stood in the shadows, watching. She always sat with her head low, her hands chained, her back against the cold bars. Sometimes her skin glowed faintly, the strange lines on her arms pulsing like soft lightning. It was beautiful and sad at the same time. One night he dared to step closer. He carried a small piece of bread he had saved from his own meal. He bent down, pretending to check the cage locks, and quickly slid the food through the bars. For a moment she did not move. She only stared at it, her wide eyes shining in the dark. Slowly she reached out with trembling fingers and touched the bread as though it might vanish. She pulled it close, holding it tight against her chest. Elias whispered softly, "Eat. It's for you." Her eyes met his. She hesitated, then took a small bite. The glow on her skin flickered faintly, brighter than before. Elias almost smiled. He wanted to say more, but footsteps sounded in the distance. He stepped away quickly, pretending to be busy with his tools. The days that followed became a quiet pattern. A glance here, a whispered word there, a little food slipped under the bars when no one was watching. The guards never cared enough to notice. To them she was nothing. But to Elias, every secret moment felt like a thread weaving a bond between them. One evening, while the sky turned red with sunset, Elias crouched near her cage again. He whispered, "Do you have a name?" For a long time she was silent. Then, in a voice softer than the wind, she whispered back, "Lyra." Elias froze. It was the first time he had heard her speak. Her voice was fragile, like glass ready to break, but it carried a strange music in it. He repeated her name quietly, almost like a prayer. "Lyra." She lowered her head, but for the first time he thought he saw the corner of her lips lift in the smallest smile. But danger was always near. The guards grew suspicious when they saw Elias walk near the cage too often. One of them spat, "Stay away, worker. That thing will rot soon enough." Another added with a cruel grin, "Touch her too much and you'll rot with her." Elias forced himself to nod and step back, but inside his chest, anger burned. He hated the way they spoke about her. He hated the way they laughed while she sat in silence, chained like an animal. That night he made a promise to himself. He would not let their cruelty break her. The bond between Elias and Lyra grew in secret. Some nights she whispered small words, sometimes in her own language, sometimes broken human speech. He learned that she understood more than she let the guards believe. He learned that she had been taken young, that she barely remembered freedom, and he learned that she had never seen the sky without bars above her. One night, as the guards drank themselves into a noisy sleep, Lyra whispered something that made Elias's heart stop. "Why, help me?" Her glowing eyes were fixed on him, searching for an answer. Elias swallowed, then leaned closer to the bars. His voice was steady, though his heart beat fast. "Because you don't deserve chains. Because you are not what they say." Her hands gripped the bars tightly. The faint glow across her arms brightened, pulsing like a heartbeat. She stared at him, and for a moment all fear seemed to vanish from her face. But the moment did not last. A sudden shout cut through the night. One of the guards stumbled toward them, half drunk but alert enough to notice Elias near the cage. "What are you doing there?" the man barked. His eyes narrowed. "Talking to the monster?" Elias stood quickly, pretending to adjust his tools. "The lock was loose," he said calmly. "I was checking it." The guard narrowed his eyes, suspicious, but after a moment he grunted and walked away. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. When he dared to look back at Lyra, she was still watching him. For the first time, her lips formed silent words he could almost read. "Thank you." Elias turned away before the guard returned. But inside he knew one truth. His secret bond with Lyra was no longer just kindness. It was a dangerous connection, one that could cost him his life. And yet, he also knew he would not stop, because every time she whispered his name, every time her glow flickered brighter in the dark, he felt something stronger than fear. The night was heavy with rain. Storm clouds swallowed the moon, and the camp's torches burned weak in the wet wind. Elias moved quietly through the shadows, his heart pounding. He had waited many nights for this chance. The guards were drunk, their voices echoing from the mess hall. The storm covered most sounds. If there was ever a time to free her, it was now. Lyra sat in her cage, her head resting against the bars. Water dripped down her glowing skin and the chains on her wrists rattled softly. She lifted her eyes when Elias approached. Fear flickered in them, but also something else. Trust. Elias crouched close, pulling a small tool from his pocket. His hands shook as he slid the thin piece of metal into the cage lock. He had fixed many machines before, but never had his fingers trembled this much. Each click of the lock felt louder than thunder. "You must trust me," Elias whispered, his voice nearly lost in the storm. Lyra's lips parted, and she gave the smallest nod. Her glowing eyes stayed on him, steady, waiting. The lock snapped open. The sound made Elias freeze, listening for footsteps. None came. He pushed the cage door slowly, praying the rusty hinges would stay silent. Lyra crawled forward, her chains scraping the ground, but the chains were still a problem. Heavy iron cuffs bound her wrists and ankles, connected by short links that allowed her to walk only in stumbling steps. Elias pulled another tool from his belt and worked quickly on the cuffs. Sparks flew as the metal gave way. Finally, the last chain broke. Lyra was free. She stood slowly, her body trembling from weakness, but her eyes were alive with something Elias had never seen before. Hope. For the first time, she was outside the cage. "Come," Elias whispered, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold and thin, but she held onto him tightly as though he was the only solid thing in the world. They moved through the camp like shadows. Rain hammered the ground, hiding their footsteps. The tents of the guards loomed around them, and Elias could hear drunken laughter inside. Each step felt like a lifetime. If even one soldier stepped out, they were finished. At the edge of the camp, the outer fence stretched high and sharp, lit by faint energy sparks. Elias had studied it for days. He knew one section near the machine shed was weak, its power flickering. That was their way out. But as they neared it, a sharp voice rang out. "Stop!" A guard had seen them. His torchlight cut through the rain, landing on Lyra's glowing skin. His eyes widened. "She's out." The alarm bell clanged loudly, echoing across the camp. Torches lit and shouts rose in the dark. "Run!" Elias cried, pulling Lyra forward. Her legs were weak from chains, but she pushed herself to move. The two dashed through mud and rain as soldiers poured out of their tents, weapons raised. Arrows and energy bolts sliced through the storm, striking the ground around them. Elias and Lyra reached the fence. Sparks snapped from the damaged section. Elias shoved his tool into the panel, forcing it open. For one terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the energy field sputtered and dropped. "Go!" Elias shouted. Lyra hesitated, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She reached for his hand, pulling him with her. Together they slipped through the gap just as the fence roared back to life. Behind them, guards shouted, their weapons flashing. Drones lifted into the air, their searchlights cutting through the storm. Elias and Lyra stumbled into the forest beyond the camp. Branches tore at their clothes, mud splashed against their legs, but they kept running. The forest was dark, the storm thicker beneath the trees. Searchlights swept across the canopy, hunting for them. At last, when their lungs burned and their legs shook, Elias pulled Lyra into a hollow beneath an old tree. They crouched low, gasping for breath. The sound of drones hummed above, but the rain and branches hid them for now. Elias looked at her. She was drenched, her pale skin glowing faintly in the dark. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. She was free for the first time in her life. He whispered, "You're safe now, for the moment." Lyra reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. Her touch was soft, trembling. "Why, you risk your life?" She whispered in broken human words. Elias held her gaze. His voice was steady, though inside he shook with fear and exhaustion. "Because you are not a monster. Because you deserve freedom." For the first time, Lyra's lips curved into a real smile. It was faint, but it was enough to make Elias's chest tighten with something more than fear. Something like hope. Above them, the drone circled. Voices shouted in the distance. The chase was far from over. Elias knew they had only bought themselves a little time. The soldiers would not stop. The warship orbiting above would soon be alerted. But as he looked at Lyra, her glow flickering brighter in the storm, he also knew something else. He would not stop either. No matter how far they had to run, no matter what dangers followed them, he would stay by her side. And for the first time, Elias believed that maybe, just maybe, they could escape not only the camp, but the chains that had bound both their lives. The storm raged on, covering the world in darkness and noise. But under the old tree, in the smallest space of safety, a secret promise was born between a human and the girl they called a monster. A promise that would change everything. The forest was alive with sound. Rain dripped from every leaf, thunder shook the sky, and the hum of drones circled above. Searchlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the trees like hungry eyes. Elias held Lyra's hand as they moved deeper into the woods, his heart pounding with every step. They had escaped the camp, but they were far from safe. The soldiers would not stop. They would track every footprint, every broken branch, every glow that came from Lyra's skin. Elias glanced at her. Even in the storm, her strange light pulsed faintly, betraying their position. "We have to keep moving," Elias whispered. His voice was low, urgent. Lyra nodded, her wet hair sticking to her face. She was tired, her steps uneven, but she did not let go of his hand. For the first time in her life, she was free. She would not give that up now. Behind them, the sharp bark of voices echoed through the trees. Soldiers, closer. The sound of dogs joined the chase, their growls carrying through the storm. Elias felt his chest tighten. They would be caught if they slowed even for a moment. They stumbled through the forest until the ground dropped sharply. A ravine cut across their path, wide and deep, filled with rushing water from the storm. The current was violent, carrying fallen branches like toys. Elias cursed under his breath. Crossing it would be dangerous, maybe impossible. But staying here meant capture. He turned to Lyra. Her glowing eyes stared at the water, fear flickering across her face. "We have no choice," Elias said. He pulled her closer to the edge, ready to jump. But before he could, the forest lit up with harsh white beams. Drones hovered above, their searchlights burning through the rain. Soldiers shouted from behind, their dogs barking wildly. There they are. Arrows and bolts of energy shot through the air. One struck the ground at Elias's feet, spraying mud. Another whizzed past Lyra's shoulder. She gasped, clutching him tighter. Elias turned, desperate. Run into the water. But before he could finish, something strange happened. Lyra raised her hands, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. The lines on her arms pulsed like fire, spreading light through the storm. Suddenly, the air crackled. A wave of energy burst outward, sending sparks flying. The drones above flickered, their lights sputtering. Some dropped from the sky, crashing into the trees. The soldiers shouted in confusion. Dogs howled and pulled back. The storm itself seemed to bend around her, the rain hissing as her glow grew brighter. Elias stood frozen, staring. He had seen her glow before, but never like this. She was no helpless prisoner. She carried power inside her, power the soldiers feared, power they wanted to bury in chains. Lyra swayed, her face pale, her body trembling from the effort. The glow dimmed quickly, leaving her weak. Elias caught her before she collapsed. "You saved us," he whispered, awe in his voice. Her lips parted, her breath shallow. Not safe yet, she was right. More soldiers were pushing through the forest, their shouts rising above the storm. Elias looked back at the ravine. The water roared below. Dangerous, but the only path left. He tightened his grip on Lyra's hand. "Hold on to me." Together they leapt. The icy water swallowed them whole, dragging them under with violent force. Elias kicked hard, holding Lyra tightly against him. The river spun them, pulled them, tried to tear them apart. But he refused to let go. Above, the lights of drones swept past, too high to see them in the storm's chaos. At last, the current threw them against the far bank. Gasping, Elias pulled Lyra onto the muddy ground. She coughed, water spilling from her lips, her body shaking from exhaustion. He held her close until her breathing steadied. For a moment, they lay in silence, listening to the storm and the distant shouts of soldiers who had lost their trail. Elias brushed wet hair from her face. "That power, it's inside you, isn't it?" Lyra's glowing eyes met his. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It scares them," she whispered. "They say I'm a curse." Elias shook his head firmly. "No, you are not a curse. You saved us. You're a miracle." Her lips trembled as though she wanted to believe him but couldn't. She turned her face into his chest, hiding her tears.
The storm began to fade. The thunder rolled farther away, and the rain softened to a steady drizzle. But Elias knew the chase was not over. The soldiers would regroup, the drones would repair, the hunt would continue. He looked at the forest ahead. Somewhere out there, beyond these trees, lay freedom, or death. He didn't know which, but he did know one thing. He would not abandon her. They rose again, weak but determined. Lyra held his hand, her glow faint but steady. Together, they walked deeper into the unknown forest, their bond stronger than ever. Far behind them, the soldiers shouted in frustration. Far above them, the warship circled in silence. The galaxy still called her a monster. But Elias knew the truth. She was the light that would guide him through the darkness. And their chase had only just begun. The forest was quiet now, too quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind dripping leaves and the smell of wet earth. Elias and Lyra walked carefully through the darkness, their clothes heavy with rain, their steps slow from exhaustion. Every sound made Elias tense, the snap of a twig, the hoot of an owl, the distant hum of a drone. The soldiers had lost them for the moment, but he knew the hunt was not over. Lyra clung to his hand as they moved, her glow faint, as if her strength had been drained by what she had done in the forest. Elias kept glancing at her, worry carving lines in his face. She was free, but fragile. He had to keep her safe. After hours of walking, the trees began to thin. The ground rose, leading to an open hill. At the top stood a crumbling building, half hidden by vines and moss. Its roof was broken, its walls cracked, but its tall dome still rose into the sky. Elias stared at it, his breath catching. An observatory. He had heard stories of this place, built long ago by explorers who wanted to study the heavens. Now it was abandoned. Forgotten by most. To Elias, it felt like fate. "Come," he said softly, guiding Lyra toward the ruined dome. She looked at him with tired eyes, but followed without question. Inside, the air was damp and dusty. Broken machines and shattered glass covered the floor. But in the center stood a massive telescope, its metal frame rusted but still intact. Elias's heart raced. He had once fixed smaller versions in the camps. Maybe this one could still work. He set down his tools, excitement replacing his fear. Lyra tilted her head, watching him as he brushed away the vines and began adjusting the gears. "What is this?" she asked in her soft, broken voice. "It's a window," Elias said with a small smile. "A window to the stars." Lyra's glowing eyes widened, confusion and curiosity mixing on her face. "Stars?" She repeated the word carefully, as though it was foreign. Elias stopped, staring at her. "You've never seen them?" She shook her head slowly. "Always. Cages. Darkness. No sky." Elias felt his chest tighten. She had been robbed of even the simplest wonders, chained away from the world's beauty. He turned back to the telescope with new determination. The gears groaned as he forced them to move, the lens grinding into place. At last, the telescope pointed upward through the broken dome where the clouds had parted. He looked through it first, adjusting until the glass cleared, and then, with a smile, he stepped aside. "Here, look." Lyra hesitated, her thin fingers brushing the metal frame. Slowly, she bent forward and pressed her glowing eyes to the lens. The moment she saw them, her breath caught. The stars stretched endlessly, countless lights scattered across the black sky. Some shone bright, others faint, forming rivers of fire that stretched beyond imagination. She gasped softly, her lips parting in awe. Tears filled her eyes, and she pulled back, blinking as though she did not believe what she had seen. "They are beautiful," she whispered. Elias smiled, his chest warming at her wonder. "Yes, they are. And so are you." Lyra stared at him, her tears glistening, her glow flickering brighter than before. For the first time since he had met her, she looked free, not just from chains, but from the weight of being called a monster. She looked like someone seeing hope for the first time. They spent long minutes there, Lyra gazing through the telescope again and again, whispering softly to herself. Elias sat nearby, watching her with quiet joy. For a little while, the danger outside felt distant, the warship above forgotten, but peace never lasted long. The faint hum of engines reached Elias's ears. He stiffened, listening. Searchlights swept the forest below. The soldiers had found their trail again. Drones buzzed closer, their beams cutting through the trees. Elias rose quickly, grabbing Lyra's hand. "We have to go." She looked at him with panic. "But stars, you'll see them again," he promised. "I swear it." They hurried out of the observatory, slipping through the shadows as the searchlights grew brighter. The sound of boots crashed through the forest behind them. Shouts echoed, harsh and angry. Lyra glanced back once, her eyes lingering on the broken dome and the telescope that had shown her the sky. Then she gripped Elias's hand tighter, running with him into the night. The soldiers stormed the observatory minutes later, their lights sweeping across the broken machines. One of them shouted into his radio, "They were here! Find them!" Farther away, Elias and Lyra moved silently through the forest. Exhaustion weighed heavy, but hope pushed them forward. Lyra still carried the vision of the stars in her heart, glowing brighter than fear. For the first time in her life, she believed she was more than what they called her. She was not a curse, not a monster. He was a part of the universe, a spark among the endless stars. And Elias, walking beside her, knew one truth as clear as the night sky. He would do anything to keep showing her that light, even if the whole galaxy stood against them. The forest had grown darker, the moon hidden again behind thick clouds. Elias and Lyra moved quickly but quietly, the sound of soldiers chasing them always close behind. The hum of drones hovered in the air, their searchlights sliding between the trees like sharp blades of light. They had run far, but there was no end to the hunt. Elias knew it in his bones. They would never stop. The soldiers wanted Lyra locked in chains or dead, maybe both, and they wanted him silenced too, for daring to defy them. At last, the trees opened into a small clearing. A stream ran through the center, and broken ruins of stone walls surrounded it, remains of some long-forgotten outpost. Elias pulled Lyra into the shadows of the crumbling stones. His breath was heavy, his chest burning. "We can't keep running forever," Elias said softly. His eyes scanned the dark forest, already seeing flashes of torchlight weaving closer. "We need to make a stand." Lyra's glowing eyes widened in fear. "Fight them?" Her voice shook. Elias nodded. "Yes, we use what we have, the forest, the ruins, and your power." She looked down, her hands trembling. "My power hurts. I can't control." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then I'll stand with you. We'll do it together." For a moment she stared at him, her breath quick and shallow. Then slowly, she nodded. A faint light flickered along her arms, weak but steady. The shouts grew louder. Boots stomped on wet earth. The soldiers were almost there. Elias moved quickly. He found fallen branches, heavy stones, and sharp pieces of metal from the ruins. He set simple traps, branches rigged to snap, rocks balanced to. Oh, fall. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lyra watched him, her eyes wide, and then she too began to prepare. She touched the ground, her glowing lines pulsing softly. The earth seemed to hum beneath her fingers. The first soldier burst into the clearing, his weapon raised. Elias pulled a rope he had tied, and a heavy branch swung down, slamming into the soldier's chest. He fell with a cry. More soldiers rushed in, shouting orders. Lyra lifted her hands, her glow bursting brighter. Sparks of energy leapt from her fingers, striking the drones above. They sparked and fell, crashing into the ruins. Soldiers raised their shields, but her light cracked them like glass. "Monster!" one soldier shouted, firing his weapon. The blast hit the stone wall near Elias, spraying dust and shards. Elias dove behind cover, pulling Lyra with him. His heart raced, but his resolve hardened. He would not let them take her. He grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and fired clumsily, forcing the attackers back. Lyra stood beside him, her glow flickering stronger with every breath. She raised her hands again, and a wave of light pulsed through the clearing. The soldiers staggered, covering their eyes. For the first time, fear showed in their faces. Elias looked at Lyra. She was trembling, her body fragile, but her eyes burned with strength. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't cursed. She was powerful, and she was fighting for her life. "Stay with me!" Elias shouted as the next wave of soldiers charged. They fought together. Elias used every trick he could, throwing stones, pulling down branches, firing stolen weapons. Lyra unleashed bursts of light, striking drones from the sky and blasting soldiers off their feet. The clearing became chaos, fire and light mixing with shouts and screams. But it could not last forever. For every soldier they dropped, more came. The ground shook as heavier machines entered the forest. Drones swarmed above again, searchlights burning through the night. Elias's chest ached with exhaustion. His arm bled from a grazing shot. Lyra swayed, her glow flickering weakly. She had given too much already. Then the forest lit up with an unnatural glow. Elias looked up, and his blood ran cold. Above the trees, a massive shadow loomed. The alien warship. It had finally come down from the skies, its engines roaring like thunder. A voice boomed from hidden speakers, shaking the ground. "Hand over the creature, surrender, and you may yet live." The soldiers pulled back slightly, their weapons lowering as the warship's light swept across the clearing. Elias stood tall, though his body trembled. He moved in front of Lyra, shielding her with his own body. His voice was steady, defiant. "She's not a monster. She's beautiful, and I won't give her to you." The soldiers shouted angrily. The warship's engines roared louder. But Elias did not move. Lyra, weak but glowing, reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her light spread, wrapping around them both like a fragile shield. Together, they faced the army. The night held its breath. The next moment would decide everything.